Hey guys, today we're in the book of Judges, chapter 15. So we left off with Samson, and now after some days, after the time of harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. And when he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber, but her father would not allow him to go in because her father said, I really thought that you utterly hated her. Now, we're not sure exactly why her father thought this. Probably the Philistines kind of led him into this idea, but for some reason they did, and he allowed her to marry his best man, right? Which is what we read yesterday in chapter 14. But then Samson, being upset, as you can imagine, said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. We can see here that Samson's anger and vengeance is he has a plan, right? And so he says, this time I'm not going to do the killing. Something else is going to happen. So what happens? You keep reading, it says he goes and he gets 300 foxes. He ties them together by their tails in pairs with a torch in the middle. He lights the torches and lets these foxes off, right? So these foxes are running and fighting and pulling against one another, but there's torches in between them on fire, setting all of the grain fields, setting all of the orchards on fire, and probably some of the cities. And the Philistines came up. They asked who did this, right? So they figured out it was Samson, and the Philistines came and killed and burned his wife and her father, right? So Philistines are killing other Philistines. And Samson said to them, if this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you. We know now that Samson is going to retaliate once again. So you can see this whole idea of Samson marrying a Philistine, doing something that is wrong, is now causing all these bad decisions, all these things to happen. Verse 8, it says, and he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. This is just an expression of saying that he was very cruel to them. He was going to kill them in a very cruel way. And he went down and he stayed in the cliff of the rock at Etam. And so think, everybody's dead to Samson. There's nobody he can go to. There's nobody he can trust. So he runs and is kind of a loner in a cave. Then the Philistines, wanting to retaliate of what happened, right, came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up? And they said, we've came to arrest Samson. And then, verse 11, then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cliff of the rock at Etam and said to Samson, do you not know the Philistines are our oppressors? This tells you the idea of how bad things really are, right? That the tribe of Judah, the tribe of the kings, the best tribe of Israel, they would rather support their oppressors, the Philistines, than to support their deliverer, Samson, right? So their oppressors come and say, hey, we want Samson. And they say, okay, we would rather give you what you want than to support the man who could maybe free us, right? Remember what Samson has done. He has killed a lot of people. He seems to be kind of the leader and the one whose eye of the Philistines is upon. So they could have supported him, but it just tells you how bad things are, right? That they're leading more towards Judah. So they come down and say, hey, you know the Philistines are against us. You know how bad things are. And he asked them, are you going to kill me? And they said, no, we're just going to bind you. And so it ends, verse 13, so they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. That idea they bound him means that he allowed them to bind them, right? So it's not that they overpowered him, even though they had 3,000 men, but Samson allowed him to be bound in new ropes, which mean they were strong. They would not stretch. They would not break. And then they take him back to the Philistines. And then the Philistines came shouting to meet him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed over him. The ropes basically broke off in his strength because the Spirit came around him. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and put out his hand and took it. And with it he struck 1,000 men, which means he killed 1,000 men. You think of a jawbone of a donkey, right? You think of a long jawbone, but the bone would come up here. So in your mind, think of something that is very like a sickle shaped, right? So you're going to have the part of the mouth here comes up, and then it comes and curves down, and it would have been very long, and it would have still had the teeth in it. So it's going to be like a big curved sword, or like a sickle without a handle. So he picks this up and he kills 1,000 Philistines. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, which means I have piled up masses of bodies, right? I have totally just struck the Philistines. And as soon as he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and the place was called Ramoth Lehi, which means Jawbone Hill, right? So this place is known still today of that place. But then you see something that's very interesting, right? He goes and he kills 1,000 Philistines. He's the deliverer. Even though he's made bad decisions, this is the man that God is using to subdue the oppressors of Israel. And then in verse 18, it says, he was very thirsty. This is a reminder, it's not only to Samson, but to Israel and to us as we read this, that even though that the Spirit was around him, even though God was using him, he was still a mortal man. He still was thirsty. He still had an issue. He was not some God. He was not some deity. He was just an average man. And so he prays to God. He said, you've granted me the salvation, but now I'm going to die of thirst. How could you let this happen? And God split open a hollow place and provided water to him. God will always provide for his people that are doing his will. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. So after this wiping out of 1,000 Philistines, he rules for 20 years against the Philistines. He is the deliverer. And what's interesting here about chapter 15 is, even though we've seen it in 14 and 13, that this idea of Samson, this idea of a deliverer, he is a deliverer, but he has sinned many times in his way of delivering. It's not until we get to the New Testament, when we see Jesus, that we have a deliverer that delivers his people without sin. And that, of course, is Jesus Christ. And it is because he delivered without sin that he becomes our high priest, that great sacrifice. He is the one that can not just deliver us in the day from our oppressors, but he can deliver us from eternity. And that's what makes Jesus so important. Hope that makes sense. And the story will continue tomorrow in chapter 16. God bless.